Hey everyone, Chris here from IELTSadvantage.com. Hope that you're all doing well. And we have a pretty unusual lesson for you today. I used to do this with students when I taught in classes, when I taught face-to-face and when I used to teach at the British Council. But I haven't done this in a while. So I was thinking over the weekend, what would be the best thing to do this week in terms of live video? And what we decided to do was this, a IELTS speaking test demo. So I used to do this in the classroom, and what I would do is I would do a role reversal with the students. So I would get the students to ask me speaking questions, like real questions, as if it was a real test, and I'd answer them to the best of my ability. And the reason what we do that is not so you can copy my answers. So copying answers on the speaking test is not a good idea. Because the examiner will spot it and they could give you a band 0, but they'll also ask you more difficult questions you're not expecting, and they'll judge you on how you deal with those rather than how you dealt with questions that you memorized. So the main reason we're going to do this is so that you can spot some things that you didn't expect or you find unusual or maybe conflict with how you think the speaking test should be done. Because many of you, the main reasons why you're not doing so well on the speaking test, it could be these things: fluency, pronunciation, grammar and vocabulary, but it could also be that you have misconceptions about what to do on test day. So the answers that I'll give you will act as a model, and you'll be able to compare that model with how you think they should be answered. So feel free to comment and tell me anything that you find unusual or you disagree with, or feel free to criticize me in any way, because if you do that, I'll be able to chat with you, see what you think about it, and we'll be able to get to a point where we'll be able to help you with your preparation, with your speaking test. This should take about 45 minutes actually. We did this on Facebook and we ran out of time. So what we're going to do is we're going to do part 1. Then I'm going to explain some things that you might not be aware of about part 1. Then we'll do part 2, again an explanation of part 2, and then we'll do part 3. So that should take us about 30 minutes to go through that. And then we'll talk about fluency and coherence, pronunciation, grammar and vocabulary. Why? These are the 4 marking criteria, the 4 things that you need to be worried about. These are the 4 things that the examiners will be thinking about, so you should be aware of these, and you should be thinking about what the examiners want so you can give it to them. So that's really what we want to be doing on exam day. So let me check. Is everything working okay and everything? We're ready to go? Okay, so I have my assistant with me. He is going to act as the examiner, and he's going to ask me questions, and I will answer them to the best of my ability, as if I was doing the test. So, will we get started?
Yeah, so let's talk about your hometown. What kind of place is it?
So my hometown is a little place called Dundrum, County Down, and it's a tiny little village. It's beautiful though. Where we live is right beside the sea, and it's beside a place called Dundrum Bay. So the sea water comes in each day, so you can see the sea is beautiful, but it's a bay, so there's no waves, so it looks kind of like a lake, but the sea comes in and out each day. And then on top of that we have the mountains. So it's one of the only places in the world where you can look out your window and see the sea and the mountains all in the same place. So it's a beautiful little village to live in.
What's the most interesting part?
The most interesting part is the nature reserve. So on the edge of the village, if you walk about 5 minutes down the street, there's only one street in the whole village. If you walk down the street for about 5 minutes and you cut in across a bridge, it'll take you over the bridge and into a nature reserve. So it's protected by the government, so there's birds and fish and wild animals there, and a forest, and there are sand dunes beside there, so you can walk right down to the beach and you're kind of surrounded by nature. So that's the thing that people visit the village for. So not many people come to Dundrum, but when they do, it's to go to the nature reserve.
What kind of jobs do people do there?
I'd say the number one industry here is agriculture. So at the moment we're surrounded by cows and sheep and horses. So I think most of the farmers around here deal with livestock. So that's probably the number one job. But for people who aren't farmers, a lot of people commute into Belfast. So Belfast is about 30 miles away, takes about 1 hour. And Belfast it's the capital city of Northern Ireland. So it has many jobs, government, commerce, IT jobs. There's a lot of jobs in call centres there. So people, drive there each day or get the bus there each day.
Would you say it's a good place to live?
It's a great place to bring up children. It's a boring place if you're a teenager or you're in your 20s. So there's not many places to socialise. There's not many places for young people to have a good time. But it's a great place to bring up young children. Because we're in the middle of the countryside, the beach is quite close by, the mountains are close by, and we also have some of the best schools in the country right on our doorstep. So it's a great place to live.
Let's talk about accommodation. Tell me about the kind of accommodation you live in.
So I live in quite a big house, a 4-bedroom house, and it's on the edge of the village where I'm from. And yeah, it's a detached house, so there are not many other houses around it. There are a few other farms, and our closest neighbours are about 30, 40 metres away. So yeah, that's the type of house we live in.
How long have you lived there?
We've lived here for about 2.5 years. So before that we lived in Vietnam. So my wife is from Vietnam, and we decided to move back here, but we were uncertain about whether we would move back to Vietnam or stay here. So I wanted my wife to be happy here. So we moved here and we settled here. She loves it. And I think we'll be here for a long time.
What do you like about living there?
The main thing I like about the house is the amount of space we have. So there are 3 levels to the house. There's the main living level, and then you go up the stairs, and there's the sleeping level where the bedrooms are. And then in the basement, that's kind of my working level. So there's the office down there. It also has a separate building in the grounds of where it is, that used to be a garage, but we converted it into offices. So it's great to be able to run out of the house. It's about 5 meters from my front door to my office, so no commute for me.
Let's talk about art. Did you enjoy doing art lessons when you were a child?
Not at all. I really hated art when I was a child, probably because I'm terrible at it. And I think that when you aren't very good at something, you're not really going to put much effort into studying it. So my art teacher absolutely hated me because I never did my homework. And I was probably the worst art student in my school.
Do you ever draw or paint pictures now?
No, because as I said, I don't really have a talent for art. But since I've had my little boy, obviously, children love to draw. So what we do is I take him into my office here and I give him markers for the whiteboard, and he basically tells me what to draw. So he's not very critical because he's 3 years old. So he tells me to draw, a helicopter, or he's really into Power Rangers. So I draw that on the board, and he attempts to do it also. So that's basically all the drawing I do.
When was the last time you went to an art gallery or exhibition?
There are no art galleries where we live, and I'm not really into art, so I haven't been to one recently, but the last time was when we visited London. So myself and my wife and my little boy, we visited London. We were staying in a hotel beside the Victoria and Albert Museum, so we decided to go in there, and I was actually amazed at how much I enjoyed being surrounded by beautiful paintings, because as I've already mentioned, I'm not really into art, but it was actually a pleasurable experience. But my little boy, he was 2 years old at the time, didn't really enjoy the art, so we had to leave pretty quickly.
What kind of pictures do you like having in your home?
We don't have any art in our home because we rent our home. We probably, when we buy a home, we'll have more time and more money to spend on curating the furnishings and the different pieces of art in the home. But at the moment, it's really just family photos. Not many photos of me, but lots of photos of my wife and my baby. The only photos of me are from my wedding day because my wife insists on having them up, but I don't really like looking at myself, but she does.
That's the end of part one.
Okay, so part one. When I normally do that with students, there are a few things. So I normally tell my students, note down anything you find unusual or that you disagree with or that you do differently. So for part one, many students say that my answers are too short. So this comes from, I think, many students memorize answers, and they memorize very, very long answers. So, you know, for some students, you say, tell me about your hometown, and they'll talk for 5 minutes and they'll tell you everything about your hometown. So for me, it was 2 or 3 sentences, and all of the answers that I gave for part one were about 2 or 3 sentences, because it's just normal, everyday, you know, small talk for part one. You're just easing into the test. You don't need to give really, really, really long answers. And the examiner also has to ask you a range of different questions. And they simply just won't have time if you give really long answers, and they'll actually stop you at times. And if the examiner stops you, many people become flustered, and that affects their fluency, and they can get really stressed out. So for part one, you know, don't count words or count sentences or anything like that, but really just answer the question and add a little bit more detail. So just really answer the question and then add detail or add an explanation, or you could add a story, just a short personal story or an example to help you develop it. But you'll see in a moment there's a big difference between part one and part three. The other thing that a lot of people comment on is they say, you're very relaxed or you're informal. So again, this comes from a misconception about what the speaking test is. They are not testing your ability to speak in a really, really formal academic way. They're testing your ability to speak to normal human beings. So if you were speaking to a friend or a colleague or a teacher, imagine you're meeting new colleagues on the first day at work, or you're meeting a new teacher or new classmates on the first day of a new class. You're not going to speak to them in a really, really, really relaxed way, but you're also not going to say, hello, my name is Chris, I am from, you know, speaking in a very robotic, academic, overly formal way. So if you're really stressed out and you're not relaxed, it's actually going to affect your fluency. It can also affect your grammar and vocabulary, because if you're really tense, you're going to be making more mistakes. So do feel free to speak to the examiner like they are a real human being. Some examiners are the same as everybody else. Some of them are really friendly, some of them aren't friendly. Even if you get an examiner who's not overly friendly and doesn't put you at ease, try and speak to them like they are a friend or a colleague or a teacher or something like that. I know a lot of you come from cultures where teachers are revered and you speak to them in a very reverential way, and you don't have to do that. You don't have to call them sir or anything like that. All right, so that's pretty much it. Let me know in the comments if there was anything else you found strange or unusual. You have me for about 1 hour, so I'll look at the comments. Is there anything so far? Let me see. What if Bashar, I'll answer that in a minute. Generally, in which tense we can speak while we're giving a speaking test. Okay, so think about that. So you're asking which tense should be speaking. Which tense should you use in any situation? It will depend on what you're talking about. So if they're asking you about the past, you're gonna talk in a past tense. If they ask you about the present, you're going to use the present tense. If they ask you about the future, you're going to be using future structures. It totally depends on the situation. Stop treating the exam like it is something that you can use a cookie cutter approach with. A lot of you are memorizing questions, or you're thinking, okay, I have to use this tense and then this tense and then this tense. Relax, it's not like that. Again, speak to the examiner how you would speak to someone normally. Okay, so now we're going to do part 2, and we're going to show you a cue card. So we're going to show you a normal cue card. It comes from Cambridge 12 official Cambridge practice tests, and we'll have 1 minute to look at it. I'll look at it for 1 minute, and then I will speak for up to 2 minutes. Okay, so let's have a look at that. All right, so now I'm going to answer this question as if I was in the real test. All right, so I'm going to talk about a time I visited my father at work. So my father was a chef. He was head chef at a local hotel where we grew up. So we grew up in a place called Newcastle, County Down. And in Newcastle, County Down, there's a magnificent resort hotel called the Sleeve Donard Hotel. It's quite a famous place because it's attached to Royal County Down Golf Club, which is one of the best golf clubs in the world. So it's quite a famous hotel, and he was head chef there, so he was in charge of all the other chefs. And I don't know why I visited them there that day, because I was only 6 or 7 years old. I think my mum was busy, and I just finished school and no one else could look after me, so I kind of had to go and visit him at his work. But it was quite intimidating to go in there because it was a really serious, high-pressure environment. The chefs were some of the best chefs in the country. They were really dedicated to their job. They were all real perfectionists. So as a 6 or 7 year old, to walk into that environment was really intimidating. But it was actually quite surprising, because as soon as they saw this little boy, once you throw a little boy into the situation, any situation like that, kind of calmed down. Everyone had a smile on their face, and everyone was happy to see, the boss's son. The other thing I remember about that was my dad had a glass office, so he would sit in the office with me and he'd get me a bowl of ice cream, and we'd be able to look out at the kitchen and watch. I think there were about 20 or 30 chefs all working away. They could have been doing dinner for 300 or 400 people. So it was an amazing thing to watch, and it also makes me want to bring my own son to my workplace, because I hope that one day he'll be able to look back and with fond memories think about how his dad brought him to work in the same way that I can.
That's the 2 minutes up.
Okay. All right, so part 2. The main thing that students mention when I do that is talks about the bullet points. So what a lot of you do is you use the bullet points as a crutch rather than a tool. So you should use the bullet points. They're important, they're there to help you, but a lot of you use them in a way that hinders you. So what a lot of you do is you'll look at the first bullet point, then talk, then look at the second bullet point, then talk, then look at the third bullet point, and then talk. That's going to affect your fluency and coherence. It's not the most natural way to speak. Think about when you were a child and you were at school and the teacher asked you or another student to read from the book. It's a completely different style of speaking to be looking down and reading, as opposed to how I answered the question, which was just using the bullet points as reference but not relying on them. The other thing that a lot of students comment on is you didn't mention one of the bullet points, or you didn't use them in order. You don't have to. As long as you are mentioning the main topic at the top of the cue card, you're fine. You can add extra bullet point, you can add extra topics as long as they're related to that. You can skip out bullet points, you can use them in different orders. Do whatever makes it easy for you to talk about that topic. So if you look at the 4 bullet points and you're like, okay, great, I can just follow these, no problem at all, do that. But if you look at them and you're like, I don't like that one, I can't really talk about that one, or you think what happens to most students is they run out of things to say, so they'll do bullet point number 1, then bullet 2, then bullet 3, then bullet 4, and it'll be like 1 minute gone. What else do you do? So during that 1 minute preparation, think about extra things that you could talk about related to that topic. So for me, the last point that I made was about my son and about how I hope that in the future he will be able to look back in the same way that I did, and have nice memories about his dad the way I do. That's not listed in the bullet points. You don't have to do that. You can add other things. You must talk about the thing at the top, but don't allow them to hinder you, and use them as a crutch rather than a tool. So any questions about that? Let me see. So one question about part 2 was, what should I do if I don't understand the cue card? And that is something that a lot of people worry about, but you don't have to worry about it. Excuse me, most people who worry about that are looking at fake cue cards. So there's lots of websites out there, lots of IELTS websites. If you look at real cue cards, so you go to the IELTS official website, IDP website, British Council website, Cambridge English website, use any of the Cambridge official books and look at the cue cards, they're about normal everyday things like a time you visited a friend or family member at their workplace. Most people should be able to answer that. If you see a cue card and you're just like, what? I have no idea what that is. It's probably a fake question or a misreported question. It is highly, highly, highly unlikely that in the real test you're going to get something that you've no idea about. However, if that happens, you have 2 choices. You can either say nothing or you can make it up. It is not a honesty test. You can add extra details in that are not true. The examiner is not going to say to you at the end, did that really happen? You should avoid that as much as you can, because making things up might affect your fluency. But if you have a choice between saying nothing and just adding in a little bit of extra detail, do that. A lot of my students do that, and they do that with no problem at all. Some students just don't like that at all, because they don't feel comfortable either lying or making stuff up. But see yourself as an actor or an actress. If an actor or an actress is saying things that are not true, they're just acting. You're not going to get into trouble for it. But most of the time, you should just tell real stories, tell the truth, because it will help you. Okay, let's move on to part 3.
So let's discuss different kinds of workplaces. What things make an office comfortable to work in?
Okay, so I think if we think about why we go to the office and why we work, we go to work. All right, so I think anything that makes your job easier, or makes the tasks easier to do, makes the place that you work or your office more comfortable. For me, I think that means being able to find stuff easily. So I think that an office or where you work should be tidy, but number 1, it should be organized. So in my office where I work, we have a lot of IT equipment and electronic goods, or electronic cameras and camcorders and DSLR cameras and laptops and things like that. And one of the things that we do is we keep everything organized so that if we need like a HDMI lead or a battery or a charger or anything like that, we keep them in places where it's easy to access and easy to find. Because if you are going around your office and you can't find anything, you're going to get stressed out, you're going to get frustrated, and that's not a great way to spend your time at work. You want to be as calm and as productive as possible and not wasting time running around trying to find things. So yeah, organization would make it as comfortable as possible.
Do you agree that the building people work in is more important than the colleagues they work with?
I think there's two sides to that. I think some people and some companies really value the place where they work and they think that it's really important. So they like it to be in a great location where it's easy to get to, or they might like it to be in a place like in the center of a city where there's lots of bars and restaurants and shops and things like that, or they might like a building that's very prestigious and luxurious and looks great. For example, I used to be a lawyer in the City of London, and a lot of the law firms will invest in very prestigious addresses and buy very, very expensive or rent very expensive properties because they know that attracts the right some employees really, really value that. But I don't really believe that, because I think it doesn't matter if you're sitting in a beautiful office in a great location in the center of London or San Francisco. If you're working with a terrible team, those are the people that will either make your life very easy at work and enjoyable and you'll look forward to going to work, or detest your job. So I recently hired someone, and where I work out of my garage. It's not the most beautiful place, but we do have a great team, and we hopefully have a good boss who looks after looks after his staff and makes it a nice environment to work in. So I think, yeah, the team is better. Your colleagues are more important.
So let's discuss the importance of work. What would life be like if people didn't have to work?
That's an interesting question at the moment, because this is a debate that is happening at the moment because of AI. So they think that AI will replace many, many different jobs. So much like the Industrial Revolution replaced many manual jobs, AI might cause many white-collar workers to lose their jobs. So people are starting to think about the future and starting to think about what will happen when 80% of the population doesn't have a job. On one hand, I would say that will be a positive thing, because people will be able to spend time with their families and also spend time on their passions. So for a lot of people, they would love to spend more time working out, or spending time in nature, or playing a musical instrument, or painting, whatever they're into, but it's very difficult to get paid for that. So it will probably lead to a happier population. However, I think for many people, the main thing in their life is their work. And if you don't have a job, you don't have a purpose. So it's no surprise why many people who are unemployed get depressed and have mental illnesses related to depression, because they feel that they don't have a use. So I think that there needs to be a balance. I think there needs to be a balance between people having a job and people being able to pursue their passions. So it's an interesting question, and one that I don't think I have what answer would I say? A definitive answer at the moment for.
Why do some people become workaholics?
That's a good question, because I am a workaholic. People become addicted to many different things for different reasons. I think that human beings are a little bit too complex to have one answer to that question. For example, if people become alcoholics or drug addicts, it's often because they have past trauma in their life, and they want to block out the pain in some way. They want to forget what happened in the past. But overall, that's a very, obviously if you're drinking or taking drugs all day, that's a negative thing, and very bad things will happen. Your life will go down the tubes pretty quickly if that's what you do. But work is different, because if you work all the time, not all the time, but work, let's say I work 12 to 15 hours a day, and I work 7 days a week. It's a pretty positive thing. Really good things happen when you do that much work, or especially when you are doing good work, or you're doing work that you enjoy. So if you ask my wife or my son, am I a workaholic, they definitely agree with you, but I don't agree with that, because the reason why I'm a workaholic is because I'm trying to achieve something amazing. I have very, very, very ambitious goals, and I think that it's impossible to achieve something great without putting in the work. I can't think of any examples of anyone who's ever achieved anything great without really dedicating themselves to that goal and putting in the hard work. So I think people become workaholics because they have big goals and they want to achieve those goals, and they're very determined to achieve those goals. But I don't like it. I don't think it's a negative thing. All right, so that was part 3, and the way that I like to talk about part 3 is to show the differences between part 1 and part 3. So if we look at part 1, part 1 is normal everyday questions about you. So questions like about your job, about where you live, about your hometown, maybe about your likes and dislikes, your hobbies, things like that. Questions that you would ask someone if, like, for example, when you first met them, to get to know them. Normal, everyday, chit-chat questions. The big difference between part 1 and part 3, they're more abstract ideas. So whereas part 1 is really just answering questions about you, part 3, you can talk about you, like I did. I talked about my experience to help me answer the question, but it's more about a discussion of ideas. The best way that I can describe part 3 is think about an academic task 2 essay. Think about the main body and how you would develop your ideas. The most important thing for part 3, I think, is idea development. So think about how I did that. What I would do is I would show one side or show one idea and then try and develop that by explaining that idea. And I would use stories and I would use examples. So I would answer the question, but I would be developing the answer. So for example, if the question about what makes a workaholic, or why do some people become workaholics, if I just said because they have ambitious goals, that's my idea, that's why I think that, but that's not enough. You have to fully develop that. You can also show the other side of it, you don't have to, but I think that's a good way to think about it. Answering the question, explaining your answer, why you think that or why other people would think that, because remember, it's a discussion of ideas. It's not all just what you think. You might be discussing what other people think. And using examples. So they could be examples from that don't involve you, or they could be examples like personal stories. Like I used that story about my job and how much I work, which is true actually. I do work 7 days a week, and most days about 12 to 15 hours. And it's fine to do that. It's fine to add in your own ideas. So that's the biggest differences there. Let's have a look at some questions. And again, what you should be don't be afraid to disagree with me on anything, or because that's where we'll get the truth. That's where we will learn lessons. And if you say like, well, why did you do it that way, or why not this way, or why not that way, and we'll do that way. Let me see any more questions. So Fad said, yes, I thought you had to address each and every bullet point. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the main reasons why people don't do so well for speaking part 2. It's because they stick rigidly to the bullet points and they run out of time. Kasim, what mnemonic you had for part 2? So, Kasim, what I did was there are many different techniques for part 2. One thing that you should avoid is having like a rigid structure or strategy for part 2, because some questions, a structure or a strategy will be great for those types of questions. For that question, I had a story in my mind, a real story that I could just tell, and they always lead to the most fluent answers, because you're just recalling things like you would if you were chatting to friends or at a party and just talking about, yeah, I used to go and visit my dad at work, and in a very, very fluent way. Other questions you could think about past, present, future, a description, how you felt about it, all these different things, but don't stick to that rigidly. Because if I did that with my answer, like past, present, future, for example, it wouldn't have been as fluent, because okay, what do I think about the past? Okay, present, all right, I don't really have anything to say. Okay, future, and then it's a difficult way of doing things. I think the best thing to do in part 2 is to give yourself as much flexibility as possible. How I describe it to my students is have as many tools in your toolkit as possible, and try and speak in a natural way. Hi Chris, what do you think of PPF method will work in section 2? Okay, so I've just answered that question. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. You don't want to stick rigidly to a structure. It might work for some students, but I don't think it works overall. I think it's kind of like if you give a builder a hammer, a saw, and a chisel, and you just say, okay, build a house with those 3 things. You could do it, but it'd be very, very difficult. But if you had an array of tools to work with, obviously it would be much, much easier for them to build a house. Sunil, how to initiate the answer in section 3? Just answer. Oh, sorry, my light nearly fell over. Just answer the question. So what I did was I either just directly answered the question, or sometimes for part 3 what I did was I said, like, that's interesting, or that's a difficult question. By saying, wow, that's a difficult question, you don't get any extra marks or anything like that. What it does is it just gives you some time to think about your ideas. As I said, it's important that you develop your ideas for part 3. So it's important that you pick ideas that you can talk about. What will lead to a very incoherent answer is if you just start talking and try and think of the ideas as you go along. That normally leads to a loss of coherence. James, is it minus point to you as an examinee if you ask the examiner to repeat the question? No, you're allowed to do that. So you're allowed to do 2 things. You're allowed to say, can you repeat the question, please? Because sometimes you just don't understand the question. Think of real life. In real life, would you ever not ask someone to repeat the question if you didn't understand them? Don't do it for every question. Like some students, you know, what's your name? And they say, can you repeat the question? Don't do that for every question. But if you genuinely need the examiner to repeat the question, do that. You can also ask them what a word means. So for example, Justin asked me what are the main reasons why someone is, let me see the question. Question was, why do some people become alcoholics? Workaholics. I don't know why I always say alcoholics. That might be a Freudian slip. It might be. So in that situation, if I didn't understand the word workaholic, I could say to the examiner, what does workaholic mean? Or can you explain what that means? Don't say, you know, what does that word mean and that word mean and that word, and just keep doing it that way. But, you know, use those 2 things to help you out. Sunil, what should be the length of answers in section 3? Don't worry about number of words or number of sentences, really, because what you'll be doing is you'll be thinking about number of sentences rather than answering the question, which will lead to you lowering your fluency. Develop your answers. Some answers will be longer than others. Explain why you think that or why other people think that. Use examples, use stories to help you develop those answers, and think about it that way rather than number of sentences. Sarabjit, some questions like, how can children help their parents in household works? What would be a decent answer? So there's no like one answer or one or number of ideas that if you use those answers or use those ideas that the examiner is going to be like, tick, you get a high score. There are hundreds of different answers to a question that could get a band 9. The difference between the marking criteria for writing and the marking criteria for speaking is you'll notice there's no task achievement or no task response. There are no marks for content. It's not really about what you say, it's about how you say it. Now, that doesn't mean that you can just talk about anything. Like if they ask you what you did last weekend and you start talking about what you had for breakfast, that might get you in trouble because you're not coherent. You have to answer the question, but the content really doesn't matter. It's, are you fluent? How's your pronunciation? How's your grammar? How's your vocabulary? Why marking IELTS exam different from examiner to the other? It's not. Your performance is different. The examiners are using objective criteria and they've been trained, all of them have been trained in exactly the same way. Does that mean that if you go and do a test on a Saturday and do a test on the Sunday, are you going to get the same score? You should, but it's not guaranteed. It's like if Barcelona play Real Madrid this week and then play them again next week, is the score going to be exactly the same? No, because it's about, we're human, it's about performance. Sometimes you might do really, really well, sometimes you might not do well. Don't blame the examiners, get better. Like people who blame other people for their problems, they never get better. Where people who are like, okay, it was my fault, it was my performance, those are the people that are going to be successful. While giving answers, do they need to connect with each other? No, doesn't need to. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about this. All right, so let's start with vocabulary. So one of the things that a lot of students will comment when they watch this video will be like, you didn't use high-level vocabulary. You do not need to use a long list of academic or high-level words. You need to use words that allow you to discuss that topic. So there weren't any times where I was like, I really don't know what to say because I don't have enough vocabulary. And there's no point in you using vocabulary that you don't know how to use. You should always be improving your vocabulary, especially your active vocabulary. But don't try and use idioms that you don't know how to use. Words that someone gave you a band 9 list of words. There's no such thing. So what I would say with vocabulary is only use words that you know how to use and that help you answer the question. Same with grammar. Use the grammar that is required for you to answer the question. The worst thing you can do is like answering the question and thinking, have I used the past tense yet? Or have I used the present perfect? Or like just answer the question normally. The range of structures will look after themselves, and focus on accuracy. All right, don't try and use memorized sentences or memorized phrases and getting them wrong. It's obvious what you're doing and you're lowering your score by doing that. Pronunciation. For most students, the number one thing they need to be concerned about is, can the examiner understand what I'm saying? It's more about clarity than anything else. If you're hoping to get like a band 8 or a band 9, you need to work on higher level pronunciation features such as intonation, word stress, sentence stress, connected speech. But for many of you, it will all be about clarity. Can the examiner understand what I'm saying? Coherence, did you actually answer the question? Did you stick to what the question is about? Does your question make sense? Did you develop your answers? That's important. Fluency. Did you speak without pausing and hesitation? Some pausing and hesitation is totally natural. It's impossible to never pause and hesitate in a whole test. You have to think sometimes, especially if you're learning a language. You're not going to have access to, instant access to all the correct grammar and vocabulary. You will pause and hesitate sometimes, but it's about avoiding that as much as you can. All right, any more questions? Let me have a look. Thank you. Does eye contact with the examiner matter a lot? No. Eye contact doesn't matter, hand gestures don't matter, what you're wearing doesn't matter. What matters is fluency, coherence, pronunciation, grammar, and vocabulary. If a teacher is telling you that hand gestures or eye contact or something like that matters, ask them to explain where that fits into the official marking criteria, because it doesn't. Focus on what matters and forget about everything else, and that's going to help you get the score you need. Do I need to use high-level vocabulary? Just talked about that. Use high-level vocabulary if you can use high-level vocabulary, but most of you can't do that. It's like going to a gym and saying, okay, I can only lift 50 kilograms. Can I lift 150 kilograms? If you're trying to lift 150 kilograms when you can normally only lift 50, you're going to drop it on your head and kill yourself. So the same thing with vocabulary and grammar. If you're trying to use vocabulary and grammar that you don't know how to use, you're going to mess up your whole thing. And a lot of you do that. Is it important to maintain proper and perfect pronunciation to get a band 8? To get a band 8, the examiner must understand every word you say. So to get a band 8 for pronunciation, there's never a time where the examiner is like, what did they say? I don't quite understand that. So clarity has to be at 100%. Also, you have to be quite comfortable using intonation, sentence stress, word stress, connected speech, all of those things you need to be quite comfortable. Not at the level of a native English speaker, but nearly there to get a band 8. James Pajo, does accent matter? Yes and no. It doesn't matter if you don't have a British accent or you don't have an American accent. I don't have a British accent, I don't have an American accent. But if I was to do the test, hopefully I would do quite well when it came to pronunciation. The only time that accent matters is when your accent is so strong that it causes interference. So accent interference is when your accent is really, really, really strong and it stops you forming clear English sounds. But for most of you, your accent isn't a problem, clarity is a problem. So I have one student in my VIP course who's from India, and he has the clearest pronunciation ever. Like, he could speak on the radio. We were talking about that the other day. I was like, you could get a job on a radio. It's so clear and easy to understand. But he has an Indian accent. So he didn't try and change his accent to become, speak more British or anything like that. And you shouldn't try and do that. You should be proud of where you're from and your own accent, and then try to do it that way. When is your next session? Wednesday, same time, 1 p.m. And how long should answer be? Already answered that. All right, guys. So hopefully that helped you. Thank you very much. If you need anything, go to IELTSadvantage.com and you'll find a lot more help there. IELTSadvantage.com/speaking, or just go to IELTS Advantage, Google IELTS Advantage, and you'll find it. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, and that will mean that you will get a notification next time we do this. If you liked the video, hit the like button. Comment below, let me know what you thought of the lesson. Ask any questions. I do go in and answer as many questions as I can. And thank you very much, guys. It was a pleasure teaching you. Bye-bye.